All right. Hello, Catholic YouTube. Good to see you guys. Been a while. So today we're going to cover some more modern subjects. I still consider the 20th century modernity. This is definitely a personal one for me in the sense that, well, as always, full disclosure, I am of both Irish and English descent. Let me get my notes together here. I've also got a child home and a dog home. It's a very lively house this morning, so you're probably going to be hearing quite a bit of noise. Hey, can you close the door? No, I'm busy right now. I love both. I love the English and the Irish, and I love both the sides of my ancestry. I really do. I am an Anglophile. I mean, there's no denying it. But of the two, if I had to pick, I would probably go with my Irish brothers and sisters. I am a Ibernophile through and through. Just a little personal anecdote. My maternal grandmother, my actual bloodline was Irish, but I didn't know my maternal grandfather. But my maternal grandmother remarried, and it was the man that she remarried that I knew as my I called him my pop-up, my grandfather. And he too, like my blood grandfather, was Irish. Actually, he was born in Derry. I still have family there. So when he came over, my pop-up was very young. And look, I mean, my childhood, I have memories of just the accents and the music, right? Like, I was just talking to my mom the other day about the music that I remember as a child, and I remember my grandfather had this little cassette tape of Irish folk music, and at the time I could like sing all of the words. I mean, I knew this music. And he was an interesting fellow, right? Because when he was here in the States, he put together, and I have memories of this as a very young boy, this program where he brought these children over from Ireland. And I distinctly remember being a young boy, and I'm waiting at the plane terminal, and I'm seeing all these young kids coming off the plane and them going with these adults, right? And then months later, we're back at the airport. This is pre 9/11, when you could still like stand at the terminals and airports. Months later, these kids getting back on the plane and leaving. And I asked my mom like years later, I was like, what was that? I just had this memory of it. And what it was my grandfather. He was loosely a part of the Irish peace movement. And he started this program to bring over children of Catholic and Protestant families, to have them, you'd have a child that's Catholic and a child that's Protestant, and have them stay for a summer with these American families to try to get them to become friends at best, at the very least, just aware that the other person is a person and a human. So it's a very unique thing, and a unique memory of this program that he put together. So that's part of my childhood, right? I mean, I'm talking, I was raised on the Wolf Tones and hearing about Bobby Sands. And by the time that I was like maturing, I knew about these things. Like when the Cranberries came out with that song, um, Zombie in the 90s, and it had this lyric about, oh, it's been this way since 1916 or whatever that lyric was. Like I knew what that was about, right? I knew what that lyric was talking about. So added to this, in my early 20s, I became very interested in early 20th century history. A lot of what you hear on this channel is focused on kind of medieval history, but there's like it lurks within me still this love for this period between like World War One and World War Two that's just has always utterly fascinated me. Two areas in particular that I just read when I was in like early 20s, countless books on stacks of books were on the Russian Revolution and on the Irish War of Independence. And man, I would say like I was almost obsessed with these two subjects. At one point, I could have told you like by heart all of the martyrs of the Easter Uprising, right? Like Pierce and Conley and Plunkett and McBride. Like I could have named them all off. I knew them all. And I mean, I actually memorized. I probably could have said this movie like line for line. The movie Michael Collins with Liam Neeson. So we're talking like I was really into it. It's a good movie for those of you that's seen it, but it's not the kind of movie that most people would know line for line. And we're going to get into all of that in a bit, but I was, of course, at the time, young 20s, idealistic, kind of swept up in the rhetoric of British atrocities. And granted, they did commit atrocities, but the seams really started to break for me when I started looking into the Irish Civil War. Many Irishmen could tell you about the War of Independence, but few know about the Civil War that followed in its wake. And there's a complete like collective amnesia of that event. And I remember asking my mother when I was like studying this because she was interested in these subjects herself, and she was, of course, her stepfather and this family was all very involved in it. And of course, she had heard of the War of Independence and all of the Easter Uprising and these things, but she had never heard of the Irish Civil War. So at this point in my studies, my young idealism, my eyes are starting to opening that this isn't as clear cut as it would seem. So fast forward the years, and now here I am, comfortably Catholic. Most of my real interest in Irish affairs are behind me. I'm very grateful for that being a part of my like identity and my upbringing. But now as a Catholic and sort of as an adult, I don't have as much. I kind of wish I still had some of it as I did as a child. But it's hard to sort of like pick these things up again in adulthood. But anyways, as an adult here now, what a few years ago, Catholics are kind of online, like, how in the world did Ireland just pass this abortion bill? Like, what went wrong? And many Catholics around me were just utterly confused by this. And I mean, there's a real sadness and confusion, but knowing what has happened in the years of Ireland throughout the 20th century, especially sort of has given me an upper hand on that when the news broke, while it was surprising, it's not as surprising as it would seem. And I wanted to share with you guys just some of this knowledge of what I have of 20th century Ireland and what exactly went wrong. But of course, as always with history, you kind of have to step back from just the events themselves and sort of give the trajectory that leads to this. And as always, we have to start with these events with the English Reformation because it's there, even under Henry VIII, that we really begin to see a real fracturing. I don't want to spend too much time here. It's its own subject, all the events before 1916. But in short, after in particular, after the Black Death moves through Ireland, the Black Death in Ireland mostly hit, at least it hit the hardest urban areas, which were the areas that were occupied by Anglo-Norman Englishmen. The rural areas of Ireland were concentrated with Gaelic-speaking Irish who were not as hard hit by the plague. So right after the Black Death, you have English lordship in Ireland basically disappear within a matter of a couple years. Fast forward, by 1532 and 1537, Henry VIII enacts laws that put England formally in schism with Rome. And in 1536, he decides that he wants to reconquer Ireland. This began a series of colonial raids wherein, by the reign of James, Ireland comes under English rule. Yet the English, for all of their military skill, never managed to convert Ireland. And there was no interior conversion. You don't have like a John Knox of Ireland who brings the people over to the Reformation. So the Catholic majority find themselves under an increasing series of persecutions and discriminatory laws. All of this culminates in the Cromwell's atrocious war on Ireland in 1649. So this, combined with Cromwell's rounding up of Catholic dissidents, those he labels undesirables, numbers in the tens of thousands who are like shipped off to slave labor in the Caribbean, and through a series of pressures placed on Ireland through legislations known as the penal laws, what you end up with by the 19th century is that most of the country's political elite convert to Protestantism, forming a Church of Ireland, equivalent sort of to the Church of England, though in reality it's actually subservient to the Church of England. While the Church of England remained autonomous, and the peasants of Ireland, the poor people, way more numerous, remained themselves Catholic. Now, keeping in context to the wider picture, the 19th century is one replete with revolutions all over continental Europe. And this has an impact on Ireland. As well, you have the devastating potato famine, the failed rebellions in Ireland, the complex issues with peasant land holdings, and it all sort of culminates into this powder keg that's really just waiting for an ignition source. That ignition source comes in the form of World War I. Now, the Germans, you hear these stories, but you don't quite, they're never quite told as how just shrewd and calculating the Germans were in their strategic means of unsettling Allied powers at home. After World War I, obviously, and especially World War II, right? The history books are written by the victors, but you have to like step back from it and objectively say that the Germans made some pretty like calculating moves that had like lasting ramifications on the future of, honestly, just the future of 20th century events in general, right? Like so for example, they've infamously let Vladimir Lenin travel by train across Germany so that he could get into Russia and take over the Bolshevik Party, wherein, and this was calculated on the part of the Germans, he could pull Russia out of the war, which he does, right? That's part of the Bolshevik platform. So it was a brilliant move on their part as far as that goes. Less known, though, but no less effective, they conspired with Irish rebels, the Germans did, to smuggle guns into Ireland, which in turn would kickstart the Irish War of Independence with the Easter Rising in 1916. That specific event ultimately failed as the Irish population did not rise up to join the rebels, but the English made a disastrous mistake of executing the rebels that they caught at the end of this. And that, combined with increased efforts to conscript Irish men for the war on the continent, led the Irish population to begin siding with the rebels. And into this, you begin to see the rise of like the Sinn Féin party, who we'll talk about again in a minute. But before I get too further, I want to speak to the reality that tied up in all of this emerging Irish identity is the stark fact that Ireland's Catholicity is a hallmark indicator. It becomes, anyways, a hallmark indicator of its opposition to English dominance and rule. Undoubtedly, the English laws themselves made this reality, right? Had the English maybe been a little bit more prudent and not so bent on utterly destroying the papists, they may have tried more effective means of colonizing the Irish. Yet, as it was, they turned their efforts of colonization into a crusade against the faith of the people of this land. Because of this, the Irish completely wrapped their political identity into their religious identity. To be friend or foe was to be patriot or traitor, was to be Catholic or Protestant. There's no distinctions, there's no difference in these things. There was no, I'm a Catholic, but I'm friendly to the English rule. The English themselves, with their laws, would have made this an impossibility for an Irishman. So that's just the like reality. And I'm not blaming the Irish here. It was brought about by a monstrously oppressive English Protestant chauvinism and almost a fanatical desire on the part of the English to stamp out Catholicism where it was. All right. So the people get behind the cause after the 1916 uprising, after the English line up the rebels who were involved in the Easter Rising and execute them, the leaders of it anyways. The public starts to get behind this cause of what we've come to know the War of Independence. It's here actually that we really begin to see Michael Collins enter the picture, who was someone that I was really interested in. The book's over there. I pulled out the book that I have on him. It's called The Big Fella by Frank O'Connor. It's a pretty good biography of him. As well, there's the Liam Neeson movie Michael Collins by, oh, I forget the director's name. It's got a few historical inaccuracies, but as far as like historical movies go, um, it's got a good. So the thing is that it as with all Hollywood depictions of historical events, it like manipulates a few things to tell a concise story in a couple of hours. But for the most part, it's a reliable rendition of what happened. But anyways, Collins himself, he's a character that is every bit as interesting as the legends that come to surround him. Just a brilliant tactician in the guerrilla warfare style, right? I mean, he utterly like harassed the English, bringing their ability to maneuver an Irish society to a grinding halt by infiltrating their network with informants. He had his own informants who infiltrate the English government's network in Ireland, and then they would in turn give Collins information. So he knew the entire like English plans. He knew where the spies were. He basically had a survey of everything that the English were doing. And he himself would actually, you see this, they even depicted in the movie. He would like brazenly walk into English headquarters, and he knew through his informants that they had no identifiable pictures of him. So he would like be let in to these intel rooms where he would go through the papers, learning firsthand what their plans were. So he starts sending out men to harass the English, and it actually was very effective. The English lost almost all of their information about what was happening. Any of their plans were just sort of like squandered by these workings of Collins's network. The English, in turn, were left to resort to utter violence against the Irish population. They came to rely on their infamous black and tan divisions. The black and tans were these like young English like paramilitary troops that were sort of half police, half military occupiers. I mean, there's one story of the Black and Tans like driving in a tank onto a like rugby game or something that's taking place, and like full packed crowd of people watching this game. The English drive their tank onto this field and to start opening fire into the crowds of people. Eventually, though, because of all of these networks of Irish that are just harassing the English want to sue for peace. Interestingly, the leader of the opposition movement in Ireland, Eamon de Valera, sends Michael Collins over as part of the committee to negotiate with the English peace terms. It's kind of like if you would have, what is it, like the FBI's like most wanted list. Number one on the most wanted list is the guy that gets sent over to be part of the negotiation team. Whatever reason, De Valera decides Collins didn't want to go, but De Valera sends him. He comes back. Collins goes over, um, works with this committee of English people, and the Churchill was involved in it. And Collins comes back to Ireland with what's basically a two-state solution. Northern Ireland would remain under the crown. Southern Ireland would be free and independent, and this is the creation of the Irish Free State. De Valera himself doesn't like these terms, and he wants Northern Ireland as well. And he, with a group of dissenters, go to war with Michael Collins and the group that came back with the peace treaty, basically their brother in arms, leading to the Irish Civil War of 1922, where Irish were killing Irish. Michael Collins himself was assassinated by former supporters of his while he was in Cork. The Civil War does end. It ends in 1923, but it's sort of the beginning of what would be known as the Troubles. And the Troubles, you could see through the 20th century, are like this wave. They rise, they fall, they rise, they fall, they come and they go. And it's here that we really want to discuss the Catholic Church and all of this. As I said, the Catholic Church in Ireland offers a sense of identity contra England and their oppressive occupation. But that isn't just the whole picture. Many, if not most Irish were devoutly Catholic. It wasn't just a cultural norm for them. I mean, the church's moral teachings, for example, led the policy in the South. There was no legal divorce. There was no contraceptives. There was no abortions. I mean, the Irish took these things very seriously. The culture leaned heavily into the church, and the political factions were not ignorant of this. I mean, Sinn Féin was ultimately a secular party, but as is often the case, while their aims were secular, they would at times wrap themselves in the church in so much as it helped their cause, right? I mean, Sinn Féin was a leftist party that in more recent decades has shown their true colors. But needless to say, as I said, is usually the case with leftist groups in particular, they will like wear the cloak so long as it's helpful to their cause, and then dismiss it and toss it once they get what they need, right? So they'll hold the line with the church as long as they find Catholics useful and to their needs. As soon as they have the advantage, though, all of that feigning goes. And many people are tied up within at least sympathy towards Sinn Féin and that sort of identity of resistance throughout the 20th century. As well, you have the formation of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, as a sort of paramilitary force that again has secular aims to bring Northern Ireland into the Republic. And while there were certainly devout Catholics in the ranks of the IRA, the organization itself was about national ends solely, not religious, in so much as you could make those distinctions. I mean, again, it's hard with any of this stuff because an individual Catholic that's a member of the IRA might well consider himself, you know, first and foremost Catholic and see that as part of his identity. And the church is so caught up in the national events. But more and more over the 20th century, you see where nationalism begins to override the church and its teachings. And the Catholicism becomes more and more a cultural norm, not a religious conviction on the part of the adherent. As for the leadership of the IRA, that's pretty clear. They see themselves in the vein of Marxist revolutionaries along the lines of a Che Guevara or a Ho Chi Minh. From the beginning of the two-state solution, though, partitioning Ireland north and south, you have trouble. But things really begin to deteriorate in the 1960s and especially in the 70s. In the beginning of the 1970s, England passes the internment laws, where they can arrest and hold suspects in Ireland without trials and absolutely no due process. And look, just a heads up on these things, if you want like a little tip here for politics over there, when the English start passing laws dealing with Ireland, watch out, Jack, because that's usually when things start to go really bad. Usually the laws themselves are bad, and the result is violence and death. I'd recommend go back and watch the movie In the Name of the Father, starring really great actor Daniel Day-Lewis, about an innocent Irishman that was arrested in this time for suspicion of being involved in the IRA. The IRA, though, were actually actively bombing English sympathizers and Englishmen, and the IRA bombings just obliterate any moral high ground that the Irish have. Again, I was just the other day talking to my mom about this, right? And there was one that she remembered one bombing that took place. Somebody she knew, or somebody that she knew through somebody that she knew. Basically, it was like, okay, this was the IRA's target, this business right here, this building. They blew it up, right? But next door to that was an innocent person, an innocent Irish lady that had nothing to do with any of the English politics. Her business got blown up, and nobody in the IRA came to her aid to help. She just lost her business, right? So that's how they operated. So not only were they indifferent to the human life they took, they were often indifferent to the Irish that were affected through their actions. So all through the 70s into the 80s and 90s, you have this kind of back and forth. The IRA bombings, the English persecute and harass. I mean, one of the famous events is the Bloody Sunday. And if you look at the thumbnail in this video, you'll see to the right an image of this priest. And I kind of had to cut it out because I was trying to fit several things into the image, but it's a kind of a famous picture. He's holding up this bloody rag. The English basically opened fire on a group of peaceful protesters in Northern Ireland. This of course was where we get the really great U2 song Sunday Bloody Sunday from that protest. So I mean, all of this, guys, this is a tragic, awful history. And again, you cannot separate English Ulster Protestantism and Irish Catholicism from North Ireland and South Ireland political hostilities. There were peace movements in all of this. My maternal grandfather, Pop, was involved in the peace movement. John Hume, who just died recently, was a great peace politician of Ireland. By the 1990s, you get the peace agreement, which is kind of where things stand at today. So, where do we stand at today? The troubles, while not actively happening, are, to my understanding, is that they're always kind of lurking in the dark, waiting for suitable climate to rear their head again. So let me see if I can kind of paint this picture for you, right? You have all of this political strife taking place, nearly constant through the entire 20th century, like literal blood in the streets type political strife. The Catholic Church is seen as a clear marker and identifier of one side, one faction in all this strife, right? Being Catholic or not said politically who you were. The Catholic Church itself was bound up deeply into the fabric of life of the Irish, increasingly from the English Reformation up through the 20th century, so much so that it can be said the Irish people as a whole leaned into the church for guidance, for sustenance, and nourishment. By the late 1990s, the troubles come to a peace agreement almost at the exact same time that the abuse scandal hits Ireland. You combine an end of these serious hostilities with this sort of smack in the face betrayal of the clergy. The Irish people, especially those coming of age after the troubles, after the scandals, the generation that's come up today have said that, well, they don't really have much of a need for the church anymore. Sinn Fein, always trying to keep like legit public face despite its back dealings at time with nefarious elements, embrace this more and more publicly. And remember, after the troubles, we're 20 years in at this point. You have an entire generation of Ireland that don't remember the violence, that don't remember a time when priests were not seen with suspicion. And what really seems to have sunk in is this complex mix of apathy, indifference, and for the more politically inclined, an outright hostility towards the church and its teachings. And all of those points that I'm making here is like me assessing the situation. There may be more that's involved into it, but it's like you take all of this stuff into consideration, and is it any wonder, with all of these things considered, that by the 2020s, Ireland is passing referendums to legalize abortion? I knew something was up in the 2010s. My sister wanted to go visit some of our family in Derry, and she told me then, right, like she was still a teen at the time herself, maybe early 20s, but she went out with a cousin, and she said all the young were interested in was getting dressed up and going to dance clubs and drinking and partying, and then come home and party some more. Which, I mean, okay, the Irish are the Irish, right? So that's not totally unheard of, but it's almost as if the like weight of the troubles were so heavy, so constricting, so awful, that and so long lasting, that when it was finally over, the Irish, they were just done with it, right? Look, everyone else in the West is been partying since the 1960s, and they just wanted to like catch up. Here I am in the States, right? I remember my sister telling me all of this, and this was like, again, this was the 2010s. And after all that I had read at that point about the 20th century Ireland, I was like, oh, okay, so that's where we're at now over there. Okay, so that was sort of like a finger on the pulse. And I have to admit, I'm kind of torn about all of this history. I mean, as it is today, there's really nothing that can be done about a post-Catholic Ireland. If the troubles come back, maybe the church will be as it once was in some sense for the people. I don't know. I kind of have my doubts about that after the way that the Irish reacted to the abuse scandals. And once you get a generation or two in, removed from all of that, where there's no living memory of a really Catholic Ireland, what are they going to return to anyways, right? But for all of this history leading up to it, I know that my family was directly influenced by especially my stepfather's, my step grandfather's Catholicism. That in turn, actually, his Catholicism made my mother consider Catholicism as an adult. She converted, which in turn opened me up to the Catholic Church as an option when I was an adult looking into all of these things. Really, I was never swayed by Protestantism at all, even though my paternal side was nominally Baptist, though they originally came from Quakers. I never felt a pull towards any of that, even though of all the U.S. Protestants, I actually appreciate the Quakers more than any of the others. That may surprise some of you, but I have a soft spot in my heart for the Quakers. But look, what I'm getting at is that this identity of the Irish towards the faith throughout the Troubles, even if it was at times maybe more nationalist than religious, it is absolutely the reason that I am talking to you today as a Catholic, running a Catholic channel. At the same time, I think all of this pressure, and granted, the pressure was placed on the Irish from outside forces, and many times the Irish are just reacting to these forces. It really does seem to have led to the eventual dissolution of the church in that country. I mean, Sinn Féin and the IRA were secularizing long before the priest scandal. The scandal just sort of gave the forces of secularism a good argument and a crack in the levee that brought the whole thing crumbling down and sort of flooded the country with secularism. Add on top of that this sort of general trend towards decadence in the West, anyways, that sort of floods in along with secularism. The two aren't. I mean, when you sort of strip a country of all of its war and its hostility, and secularism creeps in, it's going to creep in with this high level of decadence, anyways. So, 20 years in from all of that stuff, it should be no surprise that the Irish are passing an abortion law. Look, I would love to see a Catholic revival one day in Ireland. I don't think, given how deeply entrenched it was and how hard the whole thing came tumbling, that I'll see it in my lifetime, but all things to the glory of God. Catholic Ireland gave the world so much, so much. I mean, we all have a lot to be thankful for, and I'm super proud of my Irish my Irish identity and that upbringing that I had into that world and the Catholicism and all of those roots. But a lot of that stuff is a topic for another day. Anyways, to my Irish brothers and sisters out there, the Catholics among you, I love you all, right? I think about you guys, and I'm with you in spirit and prayer, and I think many of us are, right? Our hearts break when we look to Ireland, this once great Catholic country, and see that law pass over there, just how far things are. But hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on what kind of um, happened in the 20th century. So let's see what we're at. Netflix has a great show about the Easter Rising called Rebellion. If I had Netflix, I would probably watch it. I got my wife to watch Michael Collins I had watched it, gosh, in 10, 15 years. And I'm sitting there like we're watching the movie and I'm like mouthing the lines because I still remember these lines all these years later. And it's a really good movie. So I would recommend it. It's a bit violent, so just keep that in mind. Some of the like characters um, that are in that movie. Oh, I'm trying to think of who it is. He has his one friend. I can't think of the guy's name. He was a really good actor that plays this guy in the movie. Their friendship is a little bit not accurate, but besides that, it's a wonderful movie. Um, Father John, good to see you, Father John. I was living in Ireland when the Eighth Amendment was repealed. It was heartbreaking. Yeah, the church leaders believed that they were powerless to have any effect following the laundry and abuse stories. Thank you for that, Father. And that's a heck of a time to be in Ireland. And like I said, I have many roots. I wish I might. So my grandfather had this little tape. It was back in the days of cassette tapes, and it was just this wonderful Irish folk music. And I remember I was probably my son's age or younger, maybe 5, 6, 7, something like that. And I could sing all of those Irish folk songs. And I loved the accents. I loved the music. Like I have a deep love for that history and that side of myself. And then yeah, to see that happen. But like I said, it's not once you kind of like assess these things. It wasn't so surprising for me. knowing what I know. And I've always felt like as the 20th century progressed in Ireland, you really begin to see the politics take precedence over one's Catholicism. And there's a lesson to be learned in that, especially for those of us in America, where we sometimes let our politics, I think, take front and center over our Catholicism. There's a lesson to be learned in what happened to Ireland with all of that. I know there's not a one-to-one correlation with America and Ireland, but there's a lesson to be learned. Anyways, guys, coming up on 40 minutes with that one now. EWTN made a great movie on the penal laws called Faith of Our. I've seen Faith of Our Fathers. That was a documentary. Wasn't Faith of Our Fathers? Actually, I thought Faith of Our Fathers was about the English martyrs. I think there was a Faith of Our Fathers, Eremias. Maybe that's related, but I know that there was a really great Faith of Our Fathers documentary about the English martyrs. That was a good one. I'll probably cover the English martyrs at some point, but thank you guys for watching these. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something again. This was one 20th century history. Feels like my love affair with it was from like a long time ago. So it's sort of like reviving some of this like excitement that I had for it back then to discuss it with you guys because I've sort of, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, these like stories of these like revolutions are they sort of like fill your eyes with idealism, and I was a very idealist 18-year old. So the Russian Revolution, I wasn't actually convinced. That one, all of its horrors and atrocities of the Russian Revolution, I think were pretty clear. But the Irish Revolution, well, the Irish War of Independence, it really wasn't a revolution. The Irish War of Independence has had a lot of ideals in it, right? So, anyways, guys, take care. I'm going to head out on this one. God bless you all, and I will see you next time.